Hey there. So I just became aware there's a new series on Apple TV called Underrated, and it's all about Stephen Curry or Steph Curry, who's a point guard for the Golden State Warriors. Now, the reason why I mention this is apparently he left Davidson before he was able to get his degree. And so he ended up, obviously having a very successful career, still ongoing in the NBA. But now he's gone back and trying to earn the last units to complete his degree. So what's interesting about that is he's using the Remarkable 2, which is one of the more popular e-note-taking devices. And so if that's good enough for a two-time MVP and four-time champion of the NBA, then that's probably good enough for you too. So the link to this video is I thought we would share my favorite devices, the devices that I go to and use, as a number of folks have asked. And I'll talk about why I go to those particular devices and what the potential alternates are if you have a similar use case, but maybe that's not the right device for you. And in that context, we'll find out where the Remarkable 2 fits in to everything. It's good enough for the MVP, but is it good enough for me? We'll find out. So this video is all about that. And before we get into it, please subscribe. The only thing I'll say about that is I'm going to keep producing videos. So if you subscribe, you'll be able to get them on a timely basis. All right, with that, let's get to it. All right, let's start with the first use case, and that's essentially at work. My daily driver is an e-note-taking device. It's the one I use the most. It has the biggest impact on my life. Before I used e-note-taking devices, we're going back 2.5 years now. I used to have an office that you'd walk in and there'd be sticky notes around the border of a monitor, or there'd be stacks of paper all around, and there'd be notebooks over there. And every few months, I would have to go through and cull it out and get rid and shred the paper I didn't need anymore or wasn't going to use anymore. And that cycle would repeat itself. And, it made for a messy environment. Or if I ended up going out in the field, away from the home office, sometimes I make those trips and I don't know until that day I'm going to do that. Well, in those cases, I would show up to a location and some of the notes I needed would be back in the office. So, there were a lot of things that note-taking really solved for me. So now those notes are with me wherever I go. I have ways of tracking the to-do lists that I have as I go from meeting to meeting, and so e-note-taking really has been amazing. And I really started with the books Note Air, the original, and it was a fantastic device. But I found it lacked in just a couple key areas, and I ended up going with the Supernote A5X instead. And I've got that right here. Here it is. There's the back. There's the front. This is the thing that I use every workday. My routine is I show up in my office or wherever I'm working that day. I pull out my computer, I pull out this guy next, and then I turn it on and I'm starting to write my notes for the day. Every workday. I then come in usually on Friday night, I'll plug it in and charge it. I don't need to charge the device weekly. I could probably go 2 weeks before it charges, but it's easier to have a routine of just charging it one time a week. So I charge it on Friday night, fully charged, I stick it in my bag, and I'm good to go for the next week. This is my daily driver, and I can't recommend this enough. We talked about a number of the advantages already. I'll point out that the to-do list functionality is probably the best on this device than any other device I've ever had. And there's a star marking system, and if you want to get a sense of what that's all about, I have a short video about that, so you should check it out. But it helps with to-do list, just know that. And we talked about, of course, taking notes with me. It's with me wherever I go. Another cool aspect of it is that there are a number of devices where you can share your screen. Most of them leverage some form of Miracast or something like that, where you need to connect to a device and then you can project from that device. That's not true with the SuperNote. The SuperNote, you just need to be on the same Wi-Fi network. You can open up a browser, put in the URL. It's always the same URL, and then you can start sharing your screen. And I've done that in some of my videos here as well. So it's just an amazing device. You know, the device itself is not really much to look at. I don't know how well this is going to come on the screen, but it's you know, some people I guess like the white devices. I prefer black devices instead. It just looks slicker and more professional to me. But this works because the accessories, the cover is black. It's a nice thin cover. It's absolutely perfect. The pen is absolutely amazing. I've got the stylus. I call it a pen, but I mean a stylus. I've got it right here. It's called the Heart of Metal stylus, and you can actually get it engraved. I called this one Mr. Backup because this is the second one I have. I have another one which is a different color, and I just rotate them for fun. One note about this, it's you know, got a really classic design. It's just fun to use. But a word of warning, it's got a ceramic tip. It's only meant to be used with SuperNote, so don't go buying the stylus using it on another device. That's going to scratch up your device. But for the SuperNote, it's fantastic. Now, Books does a really good job, and I really enjoyed using the Note Air. And so why the SuperNote over that, or other Books devices? And I talked about the star marking system. That's a huge piece of it. But just overall, and this is kind of hard to explain, but the software, the UI on the SuperNote is just so good. And it's just so thoughtful, and it's so easy to learn it and to have a flow and get to the files you want quickly, and that sort of thing. So it's just something about it and how they've really curated that software and that user experience that's just perfect for the office environment, and makes it better than any other device that I've ever tried for my use case. The device itself is actually a few years old. It's not the latest tech. It's not the latest screen. It doesn't have the latest processor, at least relative to eNote-taking devices, which tend to have slightly dated processors. It's not a technological marvel by any means, but it just does the job, and it is my top device for using at work and my daily driver. Now, what if I didn't have it? What device would I then use if I couldn't have the SuperNote? What's the next best thing? Well, for me, I would think that would be the Note Air 2 Plus. The Note Air 2, the Note Air rather, which I had originally before the SuperNote, it was really good. I mean, it really did come to that star marking system. I found it more reliable in taking to-do lists, but outside of that, Books still has a great product, a really solid and sophisticated note-taking app. I ended up giving my Note Air, in fact, to a coworker, and she's been using it since and absolutely enjoys it. So that's been a year and a half that she's had that since I've had the SuperNote. So yeah, if the SuperNote isn't for you, then I would recommend the Note Air 2 Plus. That's the next best thing. Okay, so that's my first and main use case, which is around my daily driver at work. Okay, so next up is going to be at home, a desktop writing pad. I know that sounds simple and, I mean, literally, it's just a writing pad. And some people may say, my goodness, why would you use an e-ink note-taking writing pad as opposed to a pen and paper? And the answer to that is there are still advantages. Even though this use case is very simple, it's literally I'm sitting at my desk and I'm at my computer, and if I want to jot down the things that I need to do that weekend, I use that process, and then I highlight things that I've completed for the day, or maybe I'm just kind of wanting to be creative and I don't want to use the computer. I want to use my hand in drawing. I'm not much of a sketch artist, but just kind of writing out ideas on a pad of paper. That's what I use this device for. And the advantage of having an e-note-taking device as opposed to paper is that it's still this very nice looking device on the desk. It's not stacks of paper. You can have multiple, files, right, in the note-taking app. So it's still much better than what the alternate would be if you're just using pen and paper, even though my use case is quite simple. So I still find value in that. And I use it a lot. Not every day, not like my daily driver at work. It's something that I would use more, 2 to 3 times a week, essentially, thereabouts. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but that's the primary use case. So what device do I use as a notepad on my desk? And the answer is the Bigme EnkNote Color Plus. This is a Kaleido 3 screen. In fact, it was the first Kaleido 3 screen that came out. Interestingly enough, shortly after this device was released, Books started to release their Kaleido devices, and the Books Tab Ultra C came out. And so, would I have bought this device had I known that device was coming out? Probably not. Bigme is not a major player in the marketplace. They're not as sophisticated in terms of their devices or their apps as Books is. And I probably would not have given this a look, but I'm glad I did. Now, while I wouldn't argue that as a whole, the Bigme EnkNote Plus is a better device than say, the Tab Ultra C, and we will talk about that device before this video is over. For writing, I actually could make a pretty good argument that it is superior, and hear me out on this. First off, there's a nice film, and I'm sure it won't come out on the screen, but there's a nice film on top of this that when you write, there's just a little bit of a scratchy sound. It's not overbearing, it's subtle, but it's definitely there, and it's nice. I really like it. The stylus is pretty neat. It looks kind of flimsy and cheap, but in reality, it's got a nice thickness to hold on to. It's got programmable buttons, so it's charged, but only charged for those programmable buttons. So I use one button, for example, to refresh. I use another button to click on the eraser. So it's just a nice, convenient stylus, and it connects to charge right on the side of the device. So I've never had to charge the stylus. It's always charged when I need it. And I really don't use the buttons that much anyway, except maybe the eraser function. So yeah, no, it's just a really nice device. It's really easy to hold in the hand. It carries its weight really well. It's not particularly heavy for a 10-inch device. Although I do use it mostly on the desk, so that's not a huge factor for my use case. But maybe the most important thing, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail a bit later, but the problem with the Tab Ultra C as it relates as a writing is that camera bump. Now, if you put it in a case, that solves the camera bump issue, but boy, that's really something that device needs to address. And again, I'll go into that a little bit more later in the video. But all those reasons combined, the film of the screen, the stylus, and just the device looks nice in general. This is my go-to now as a notepad on the desk. The last thing I'll say about it is it's true, the app for note-taking isn't nearly as functional or as solid as Books. And the templates are terrible. They're really bad. But it's easy to load a PDF as a template. I've done that here. So I just use one template, which is a lined paper. So I've loaded for free a template for that. So that problem's solved. And then really the sophisticated items that Books has on its apps, I don't need that for a piece of paper function on my desk. It's, that's superfluous. And so I don't find myself ever needing anything more out of the app than what Bigme provides. And it's stripped down, but it's perfectly fine for what I do. Oh, one last thing. I can't believe I almost forgot this, but the highlighter function on the Bigme is awesome. Let me turn this on. I've got it displayed. I've showed this on my other videos, and I'm sure people are listening to me and thinking, my goodness, this guy's nuts. But hear me out. So I'm going to write, and actually maybe we'll do a little test. I'll put this next to the microphone and we'll see if you can hear it. So I will write. Kind of butchered that last word, but there is what I wrote. Hopefully that came out. But let's turn on the highlighter. So I'm going to go, I've got it already as a preset. I've got 5 presets on top there. Let's get this up to the screen. Okay, so I'm now going to, if you can see that, I'm going to highlight. Fantastic. I love that. Now I can see other people maybe don't like it because it draws as a line and then the highlighter appears, but I prefer this way more than what Books has, which is kind of this hazy line or hazy shading that you draw out. I don't know. I really like this, and it's one of the things that I really appreciate about the Big Me. Call me crazy, and I'm sure that's not reflective of what other people necessarily would like, but that's what I like, and that's why this is my chosen device for using on the desk as a notepad. So what if I didn't have this device? What would be the next one up? And there's a lot, obviously, that could fill that void, right? I mean, you know, almost all eNotetaking devices has a generally solid note-taking app that can do the basic things that I'm basically doing with this device. But the more I thought about it, this is where I think I would slot the Remarkable 2. I think this is where the Remarkable 2 actually excels. It's a good kind of notebook replacement. It's very slick. As you know, you might be aware, I've had a Remarkable 2 in the past. I don't use it. There's a whole video on that. But I think a lot of people would appreciate it for this particular use case. And it has the slickness of the device and the UI. I think that's enough to make it a worthy successor and would be my alternate to this Big Me device. So that's my thoughts on that particular use case. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, so let's now talk about my third use case. I can't believe I have 3 devices. Anyway, I really like my eNotetaking devices and my eInk screens, as you can tell. And this particular device is actually different than the others, right? Because the others were all 10-inch devices. This use case is around reading. And we're talking about things like reading, novels and reading comics and reading magazines and even anything that's on the internet, frankly. I like having an e-reader that you can hold comfortably with one hand, and you can view all this stuff, and you can view all this stuff in color. I think it's pretty obvious what my go-to is as an e-reader, and it's the device I use probably more than the Big Me, but maybe not quite as much as the Supernote, and that's the Books Tab Mini C. This guy right here. Probably not a surprise. I've done a number of videos. I've only owned this thing for a month, but I've used it so much. I've read a number of novels already on it. I've done a bunch of testing on this thing. And it's just held up so well. My opinion of it's only gotten better over time. Some people may find the device too heavy. I find it quite comfortable to hold in one hand. And if my hand gets tired, I just shift over and it's perfectly fine. So just a really nice device. For those that don't know, this is an Android device that has access to the Google Play Store. Incidentally, the Big Me did too. We didn't talk about it because it didn't factor into my use case, but it does factor in on this one because this allows me to read, Kobo, it allows me to read Kindle, Google Books, a magazine app like Flipster, and I could go on and on. All that can be done on this device in wonderful color. And the case on this device is one of the best cases I've ever seen on an e-ink device, and I've been using these devices for over 15 years now. So that's saying a lot. This thing is just an absolute masterful device, and I can't say enough about it. This is my go-to e-reader, hands down. If I had to pick a second one, what I probably would do is, first off, I would move away from color. And this is, again, I'm doing this as recommendations to others for this particular use case. And the reason why I would move away from colors, I'm perfectly happy with the color in Kaleido 3. But there is a darker screen. You have to use the front line more, which drains the battery more. And a lot of people just don't like that. I mean, and then there's more ghosting on the color screens as well. I'm perfectly happy with it. A lot of people aren't. So if you had the same use case and you didn't like the color, the color screen, the darkness, and all those negative things I just talked about, you'd move to a black and white. And I would recommend the Nova Air 2 for that reason. You go to a black and white screen, but you still hold on to all the things that are so great about the Tab Mini C. It doesn't have that extra processor the Mini C has, but it's still a solid device, still an almost 8-inch screen, still has the Android apps and access to that ecosystem. It's actually lighter, so it's even easier to hold than the Tab Mini C. Yeah, that would be my go-to in that scenario. So there you have it. Those are the 3 use cases that I have and the devices that I use. And if you don't like those devices, what I'd recommend next beyond that. So now that we've gone through all these use cases, one of the things you're probably thinking of is, why wasn't the Books Tab Ultra C part of one of these use cases? And the reality of it is that the Books Tab Ultra C is an amazing device. I have a lot of positive things to say about it, but it's more of a jack of all trades than, for me, for my particular use cases, than it is the superior device in the 3 categories that I talked about. Now, having said that, though, a lot of people don't have the money or don't want to spend the money on multiple devices, right? I mean, it's unusual that I have, even in my history, I haven't had 3 for most of the time I've owned e-ink devices. This is a relatively new phenomenon. And most people are really just want to settle on one. And if you had to settle on one, the Books Tab Ultra C would be the one. And it is an amazing Kaleido 3 e-ink device. It's actually not bad weight-wise. It's heavier, feels heavier than the Eink Note, but it's not terrible in that regard. And it's just a solid device performance-wise, and for all the reasons that we've talked about already as it relates to a Books device. But I don't recommend it. Now, the reason why I don't recommend it is simply because of the camera bump, which you can see right there. And I don't know, yeah, there you can see it right on the side there. Now, the reason why I'm saying this isn't because I don't think that people shouldn't, buy this device necessarily, but I think it may get better soon. So hear me out on this. So Books is notorious for releasing new devices constantly. So case in point, this Tab device, this Tab Ultra C, was released just a few months ago. Roughly 6 months previous to that, and that's approximate, it's not exact, they had released the original Books Tab Ultra. So literally, these 2 devices just got released within a year of each other. Now, Books has a tradition of releasing new devices in the fall. They're for sure. You can put money on it. There's going to be an announcement, maybe somewhere between September and November, about new devices coming out from Books. Now, if I were to predict the future, I think there's a couple obvious things that most people expect. We probably expect a Books Note Air C, something like that, right? That's the 10-inch in color. That could very well be coming. Certainly, the 13-inch model, the Tab Ultra X, a color version of that's probably in the cards. So those I feel pretty good about. But what could also be in the cards is a modified version of the Tab Ultra C, maybe the Tab Ultra C Plus, for example. And maybe that device doesn't have a camera bump. Now, I don't have any sources on this. This is just me speculating as an outside observer. But I would recommend, if you're looking for that one device to rule them all, hold out at least until these fall announcements are made. They're just a few months away. And see if they come out with a version that doesn't have that camera bump. Because as a writing pad or anything where you're using the stylus to write on that, not having that bump is really good. And not having to rely on putting it in a case to negate that bump, which is what you can do. They do have a typing case that you can stick it in there. They have another case which isn't as well regarded, that does negate that. You just, put it on the case and then stick that on. That does solve that problem, but you're better off, I think, with a device that doesn't have that camera bump, and maybe that's right around the corner. But if I had to make a selection right now, what's available right now, one device to rule them all, it would be the Books Tab Ultra C. Okay, so there you go. Those are the devices that I use and why I use them and why I recommend them. And then if you really aren't into the devices that I'm using, but you have similar use cases, hopefully I provided to you some pretty good alternates that are also worth considering. It's an amazing time right now for these eNote-taking devices. All the screens that are made on these devices comes from one company, which is Eink, which I believe is based in Taiwan. And so everyone's using the same screens essentially. I mean, obviously there's different screens that could be used on different devices, but my point being is what really differentiates these different companies isn't the screen, it's what they do with the screen. And there's just tremendous competition and a lot of great players. I mean, my 3 cases come from 3 different companies, and that just tells you just how deep right now the marketplace is with really solid devices. And so it's just a great time to get into this. And obviously it was good enough for Steph Curry to close out his degree. And I think there's a place for eNote-taking devices and e-readers for everyone else as well. And hopefully this helped you figure out what might be the right one for you. If you have any comments or questions, pop those into the chat. I'll be sure to respond. I'm very good on responding to most comments. And I'll certainly try to answer any questions you have. Please subscribe as always. Got more videos coming, so that puts those videos on the radar for you. And I look forward to talking to you again. Have a great day.